Welcome to Contemplating the Cosmos. My name is Charlie Forbes.
Often people refer to Occam's razor as a scientific approach to analysis and break things down in the most simplistic way. Unfortunately, science can't account for everything when analyzing certain information, like a near-death experience. Scientists have discovered a link in near-death experiences of a chemical release known as DMT or dimethyltryptamine. But does that mean that everything that's taking place in a near-death experience is some sort of hallucination or figment of one's imagination in a dying brain? Today we have a special guest, Howard Storm. I had the pleasure of speaking with Howard on some of the deep complexities of near-death experiences, and we discussed his near-death experience. So stay tuned as we break down some of these deeper issues, and come along with us for the ride as we continue contemplating the cosmos.
Hey, welcome everybody. This is Charlie Forbes with Contemplating the Cosmos. I have special guest Howard Storm. And it is my great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today, sir. And I would like to introduce you to my audience, somebody that had a near-death experience. And it's not every day I get to talk to somebody that has had an opportunity to have an encounter with Jesus. But I would like to give you kind of the floor as to kind of how that looked, maybe just a brief overview, and then we can kind of venture down whatever rabbit trail we want to take after that. So go ahead, the floor is yours.
Well, Charlie, thanks for inviting me, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun. I like to have fun.
Heck yeah, man.
There's all the expression, this is stuff that's way too serious to take too seriously. You got to lighten up a little bit.
I know, what the heck?
The makeup and hairstylist are coming in any minute.
What do you mean?
For me.
Oh, seriously? Are they gonna give you some hair on the top?
Oh my, yeah, I have a Donald Trump wig.
Nice.
How's the weather in Idaho?
Well, today is actually a snow day. We woke up to about an inch or two on the ground.
Well, what's the time?
Like 34. I mean, it's already starting to melt. So
that's pretty warm.
Yeah, not like Kentucky. It's like probably really cold there.
No, it's in the 30s, but we had a huge amount of rain yesterday afternoon, evening, and this morning. Not today, though.
Yeah.
My wife was hiking in the hills of Kentucky all weekend, and she got drenched.
Really?
Yeah.
By the way, Marsha's a very nice lady. She's always been like really nice to me. So we're friends because of Eric Jurdy's Facebook forum.
Oh yeah. So you're kind of a Christian kind of a guy.
Yeah, you could say that, kind of.
No, seriously.
No, I am actually. So I was raised into the Christian church, but I've kind of ventured outside of my normal thought process a lot over the last 10 years. And when I say ventured outside of, I don't mean to say that I'm, dabbling into other religious perspective per se. I'm just trying to consider, because my father-in-law, we'll just say this for instance, he actually pointed out to me when his mother-in-law was dying, we were at the hospital, and he's like, because I've vocalized to him that I'm a Christian, and he's like, what makes you think that you're right? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, there's so many different religious perspectives in the world that think they're right. So I'm like, that's a good question, because he kind of has this agnostic perspective. He doesn't necessarily believe there's a God, but he doesn't reject the idea either. So I haven't really talked to him too much about near-death experiences, because I'm kind of doing more of an investigation right now, trying to figure out. I mean, my mom had a near-death experience.
Oh yeah.
And my stepbrother had a out of body experience. And just briefly touch on my stepbrothers. He actually had an out of body experience when he was ejected from a vehicle, driving probably 90 miles an hour or
So
something.
literally and figuratively.
Yes, exactly. So he ended up, like looking over his body, and he said he went from being an atheist to believing that there's an afterlife, but he didn't really get to see any kind of deity or anything like that on the other side. He just kind of knew that he was outside of his body. And as far as my mom is concerned, it was actually very similar to yours in some ways. Huh. In the sense that when she was starting to code, like her heart was stopping, and she went to the other side, so to speak, and these demonic entities were trying to shove things into her mouth. And she was saying that they were telling me that they wanted to steal the oxygen, which, I mean, I kind of wonder, like, as far as, I've researched every angle of this. So, like, as far as near-death experiences, like, there's a lot of those people out there that are skeptics and will say, oh, well, she was having some DMT flush or whatever when her body was, like, starting to die.
Well, they're full of shit, They don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
It's been disproven scientifically, by the way.
Well, obviously, near or out-of-body experiences dismisses that concept to me, because, you're explaining what's happening around your body.
No, but let me just tell you real briefly, like the thing that you just told me that you heard about why people have these experiences, oxygen deprivation.
Yeah.
Dr. Michael Chabon was a cardiologist. You ever hear of him?
No, but I'll probably look into him.
A well-known Michael Chabon. And he heard about NDEs, and he'd resuscitate a lot of people. And he thought, well, I never, had anybody say anything. And he was talking to somebody, and they said, did you ever ask them? And so he started asking people, and then, of course, people were telling him, like, yeah, like this incredible thing and blah, blah, blah. And they tell him all these things that happened to him when they went into cardiac arrest and flatline. So he figured it was oxygen deprivation.
Yeah.
So he hooked them up. He made it a policy whenever somebody went into cardiac arrest, he made sure that he was checking their oxygen levels.
Yeah. No
correlation between near-death experiences and low oxygen levels in the blood supply. None.
Yep.
Matter of fact, he was surprised to find that people that had NDEs did not have low oxygen levels ever.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen enough near-death experience stories that suggest that there's no brain activity. So you couldn't really have, I mean, when I say no measurable brain activity.
No measurable, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. For instance, Pam Reynolds is one that sticks out to me because she had a brain tumor that they brought her body temperature down to like the 50s. They put her on bypass, stopped her brain activity and her heart. So basically the only thing that was keeping her alive was machines. And they were basically pulsing this sound, this noise into her ear, just to see if there's any kind of brain spike or activity, but there was nothing. So they could see that there was no brain activity just based on what they were testing.
Dr. Mary Neal, who's a neurosurgeon in Wyoming.
Yes, I would love to talk to her. I don't know
she's the best.
I saw her on a panel discussion with the Neuro Foundation, and she was the only one that had a near-death experience on that panel, and I really want to talk to her because she kind of approaches it from the scientific perspective as far as a doctor is concerned.
But it's unlikely that you will get to.
Yeah, I know I already sent her a request, but she's busy, so. But yeah, I mean, as far as my mom's near-death experience, she went on to have, I don't know if she went up this light or up this tunnel, but she saw like her mom and her brother, my aunt or my uncle and grandma, who had already passed, and she said that she saw some other people that she didn't know who they were, but they were familiar to her, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, so, there's a lot of patterns that I look for in near-death experiences, and really, I decided that I wanted to make a documentary about it, because I'm a believer that it's a true, it's real, I guess you could say, and I've interviewed, official interviews with one other, Brian Melvin. I don't know if you're familiar with Brian Melvin. He had a hellish experience, and it seemed a lot like the Matrix or something, in the sense that, I don't know if you ever seen the movie The Matrix.
But, yeah, I like it.
Yeah, basically he saw these pods where they were jacked into the Matrix, so to speak.
Oh.
And
wait a minute, are you trying to tell me this is not the Matrix?
Well, that's the interesting thing to me. That's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to him, because I was like, dang, this reality does kind of remind me of a simulation in some ways.
Yeah.
I'm really into the paranormal, just type of discussion. But to be honest with you, I get kind of fringy with a lot of my approach to things, because a lot of it's just so out there that nobody even wants to touch it scientifically. And near-death experiences has really become a very predominant topic in my view, because I don't think it's really given a fair assessment, if you know what I mean. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, it sounds too hocus pocus or woo woo or whatever they want to make it sound like."
Well, I've heard. I mean, honestly, it is. I mean, I understand. I get it.
Well, yeah. I mean,
so isn't nuclear physics? It's woo woo. I watched a program on the Bern the Hader accelerator in Bern, Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
The other day, a NOVA thing. You know what I'm talking about?
I know NOVA, but I don't know.
No. The accelerator is the largest accelerator in the world. It costs several $1 billion to build.
Oh yeah, the Hadron Collider in Switzerland.
Yeah. I watched a program on it, and it's like, I mean, I thought it was a fabulous program, because they found evidence of the Higgs boson particle, which they've been searching for 25 years.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like critical to the understanding of the fabric of the universe. Anyways, like, I don't have anybody to talk to about that program. Not a soul. I don't know anyone who wouldn't tell me to shut up.
You can talk to me about it. Okay. In fact, I get a lot of those people too. In fact, when I try to talk to people about near-death experience, they're like, I don't really want to think about death right now. You're kind of weird that you would even be fascinated by this kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, I mean, people are talking about going to see Jesus. People are talking about, there's something being on the other side. And I mean, I've heard a lot of different varieties or interpretations of what it is, the experiences. And to be honest with you, I want to know who's communicating to us,
okay,
whether
I want to interrupt you. I just want to tell you one thing. They're not all legitimate.
Yeah.
You know that?
I mean, are they lying, or are they?
They're confabulating.
Okay. So they're making stuff up for fame, kind of thing.
Ego. Well, there are some people that are definitely out for the money, and there's some people that are out for notoriety. But that's not. Mostly, it's like to get attention.
Yeah. I consider those aspects.
So be very disciplined in who you believe.
Yeah. I've kind of taken the position now where I believe people that have out of body experiences more so, only because I know that, and I believe you did too, right? You were looking over your body. You didn't recognize your own body, right? With a lot of people that are out of their body, they don't even recognize their own.
Well, they recognize it, it's just they don't believe it.
Yeah.
You can't believe it. I mean, I didn't know I was having an out-of-body experience until I finally figured it out, because I wasn't out of my body. I had a body. I just wasn't in the old meat body.
So is it like the spirit body? In the like the way the Bible describes the spirit body, or
No. I believe that we, in our consciousness, depending upon our culture and our background and ego and all that stuff, we carry certain expectations of who and what we are.
Mm-hmm.
I was an atheist. I believed that this was me. I mean, like I believed what you're looking at on the screen there is me. That's what I thought I was.
Yeah.
I don't do that now. But I carried that understanding of who and what I was after I died.
Yeah.
And it was very real.
So did it feel like you were processing through information in your or did you just know? Was it a matter of just, because I hear people say, oh, well, it didn't take there was no thought process. It's just, you'd know.
Well, the answer to your question is yes to both. When I was with Jesus, he educated me, and there was a lot of thought processing going on. But when he told me stuff, I knew it. Mm-hmm. But he had to spoon feed me. I mean, there's several times when I asked him questions, and he gave me answers, and I said, I don't understand what you're talking about. And so he said, okay, and then make it much simpler for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I can quote things Jesus told me, and it's a little bit embarrassing, because some of it's almost like he was talking to a child, but because that's all I could handle.
Yeah. Wow. I get all flipped out at the thought of, like, you actually were standing in front of Jesus, and
I was in his arms.
Yeah. And you were, gosh, I feel like we should take a step back a little bit and just kind of have a little bit of an introduction as to, I mean, most of the people that probably hear this are probably going to know who you are and have heard your experience at some point. I mean, I kind of want to ask different questions than you're used to being asked, just because.
That'd be good. I would. Guess what? I've done a lot of interviews. I've done a lot of talks.
Yeah, kind of
hundreds.
Oh yeah,
seriously.
I kind of figured. Yeah, I mean, I want to, play the devil's advocate a little bit, just to
go for it.
To kind of, come at it from a different angle, because sometimes, because things become so convoluted when you have, those people out there that are, you got to discern, who's authentic and who's not. And
absolutely. That's, yeah. I mean, I just said that in different words to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've taken the position now where I consider, the perspectives that I hear. I eat the meat, spit out the bones, and kind of, now what it comes back to is authority. It's like who has the final authority when it comes to information. And yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that for me, I feel like the Bible is the final authority. And if something is just so far out there and just like completely contradicts the Bible, I'm like, that's where I'm like, okay, I'm going to reference Brian Melvin's near-death experience when he basically passed. He said that he was passed away for 4 hours. I didn't even know how that's even possible, but a lot of the research that I've been hearing is that your body your heart can stop, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're dead. That the cellular breakdown is when it really is considered death.
According to Raymond Moody, who broke the whole thing open with the book Life After Life.
Yeah.
The reason I call it near-death experience is, as a physician and a doctor of philosophy, in that book, Life After Life, he said, you can't call them death experiences because if the people came back, you can't prove they really died. As in, one definition of death is like you don't come back. So he said, rather than argue that, because it's just a useless argument, you go round and round and never, you can never resolve it.
Yeah.
Called it near death experience. Now, if you asked me if I died, I'd say yes. Then you could say to me, well, why do you call it a near death experience? Because,
and I don't know if you ever had a chance to talk to Eric Jurdy, but
oh yeah, I have.
Yeah, he was telling me that there is a difference between near death and death experience. I guess Robert Osgood is one of the guys that he knows very, very well. I didn't get a chance to talk to Robert Osgood, but I'm kind of given the impression that they interpret the more authentic near-death experiences, the ones that were full death experiences, or the ones that literally like their heart was already stopped and their I mean, again, it all comes back to the definition, but I feel like the way that I interpret it is, and I'll always present that I don't really know anything, I just interpret it a certain way, and this is my bias perspective, that when your body recognizes that it's shutting down, it has a chemical release known as DMT, or now I'm not saying that that's just a hallucination. I'm actually thinking it's the eject button that releases your spirit or your soul or whatever, and then you have an experience outside of your body, and then this thing we call a body is a vehicle.
Yeah. See that. Let me interrupt you here for a minute. See, my perspective is, I'm a spiritual being having a physical experience.
Mm-hmm.
So what we call dying is leaving this vibrational state of being called the physical universe.
Yeah.
And we become, or we can become, it's sort of waking up to, or emerging like a butterfly coming out of the cocoon.
Mm-hmm.
No longer,
so is it a state of maturing? Like we're maturing to the next phase kind of thing?
If you're maturing, but there are people that aren't maturing and they remain caterpillars. They go to hell.
I really want to break down the hell thing, but that's going to take up a lot of time because I have a lot of questions about that, to be honest. But as far as
for hell, I'm all about hell, man.
Well, so like obviously there's a lot. Oh man, I don't want to get into this yet. We'll revisit that.
Let's start talking doing the thingy.
So you had a near-death experience, and I mean, again, a lot of the audience is probably aware of what your experience was, or what happened. Obviously, you were in France. You were a professor in art, and you were, I forget exactly why you were in France, but you definitely had something happen. Well, go ahead and explain.
Let me give a brief synopsis of.
Yeah, why not?
So this was June 1st, 1985. I was a 38-year-old art professor and department head at Northern Kentucky University of Art. And on the last day of a 3-week tour where I was taking students around to museums and galleries, on the next to the last day of our trip, I had a perforation of the duodenum, which is, in simpler terms, a hole went through my small stomach, and so that the gastric juices were now migrating throughout my abdominal cavity. This is the stuff that if you take a tooth and put it in your digestive juices, in one day it'll be gone. It's very, very strong. It's hydrochloric acid is the main ingredient of your digestive juices.
So it's digesting your insides, in other words.
Yeah, and what it feels exactly like fire. put your hand over a candle and hold it there. That's what it felt like, except it was in the middle of my gut and I couldn't stop it. It was like having a fire in the middle of me. My wife called the desk at the hotel. They took me by ambulance to a hospital. I was examined in emergency. They knew what was wrong immediately, and I was sent to a surgical hospital, which was the Hospital General d'Assistance Publique de Paris, which is the big public city hospital, great big multi-block complex of hospitals. Anyways, because it was a Saturday and because of the way that they did thing at this hospital, when I got to the doctors, the doctor that came to the hotel that called the ambulance, the doctors in emergency, all told me that if I didn't have surgery within an hour or so, I would die. Mm-hmm. In the U.S., doctors told me that my life expectancy was a few hours without the surgery.
Real quick, that must have been scary to think like, oh my gosh, I'm probably going to die or I might die.
No, because it wasn't scary at all, because I was in Paris and I'm a Francophile. I love the French. I love Paris. I love French art. That's why we were there for a week. You know, I mean, I spent 3 days in the Louvre, not enough time.
Yeah.
You know, I was confident that everything was just going to be fine and dandy. They told me I'd be in the hospital for a month and then I'd be sent home and it would take me like a couple months to recover.
Yeah.
Because it was major abdominal surgery. So it's like, okay, you know, I can do this. They never gave me at Cochin any pain medication.
Yeah.
Because they said that since I was going right to surgery, I would be getting that in surgery, and they didn't want to give me something that would interfere with what they were going to give me in surgery. So, unfortunately, there was no doctor available at the hospital. I didn't know this. I kept waiting for the doctor to show up, and none never showed up. So 10 hours later, I'm still waiting for the doctor.
Yeah.
My condition had gone from the worst pain I've ever experienced in my life, and that without exaggeration, on a scale of 1 to 10, it started off as a 10, and then it got worse and worse and worse. It was off the charts. Part of the effect, I became very weak and it was getting very, very difficult to breathe.
Yeah.
I couldn't think because it was overwhelming. I mean, I tried to distract myself by think of something else other than just wanting to scream my head off, you know. I mean, which I wasn't doing because, you know, I'm not a screamer, but anyways, so nurse came in at 8:30 that night. This started at 11 in the morning, and at 8:30 that night, nurse came in and said they were unable to locate a doctor, and I'd try and get one the next day.
That must have been discouraging.
Well, that's when I realized it. Game over, you know.
Yeah. Because
I had been expending all of my energy into trying to breathe in, breathe out. Mm-hmm. That's what I was down to. Was like, you know, see, any breathing agitated the migrating acid in my abdominal cavity, which was now, the fire was now from my groin to my collar, to my
collarbone.
Neck. Yeah. Collarbone, yeah. It wasn't a point anymore. It was my whole abdomen was on fire. And so when the nurse said that there was no surgeon available, and every doctor I've talked to in the U.S. said, it's a miracle that you lived that long. There's no way you should have lived that long, you know?
Yeah.
So I said goodbyes to my wife, and I'm trying to make this as brief as possible. And then was standing next to my bed, and I felt wonderful. I felt better than I ever felt in my entire life, and I was like so happy. And I figured, I've been healed. It's wonderful.
So just like a blink of an eye, all of a sudden you're standing next to your.
Well, I went unconscious because I stopped breathing,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden, like, now I'm all better. This is great.
Yeah.
I did a reality check, and I felt my senses were greater than they'd ever been in my entire life, and I got very angry because I was unable to communicate with my wife or the very nice French gentleman who was in the bed next to me, Monsieur Florin.
Mm-hmm.
I heard people calling me outside the room by name. And I asked them if they were from the doctor, and they said, we know all about you. We've been waiting for you. And so I assumed that they had been sent by the doctor. And they called me out into the dark hallway, and I went with them on a very long journey into abject darkness, at which point they tore me apart.
Yes.
And people always ask me when I do this publicly, like, did it hurt? And I'm like, yeah, it hurt, like just like if it was in this world. People
Yeah.
biting off your ears and other appendages and gouging out your eyes and, ripping out your, anyways.
So this experience that you were having up to this point, I've heard on several, many different experiences that the way that you perceived was that it was more real than
Yes.
than your normal, like right now.
Because my senses were greater than they are in this world.
Yeah.
Every sense, all 5 senses. So I don't know how you want to measure reality, but basically I measure reality by what my senses tell me.
Yeah.
If the hamburger doesn't smell good, I'm not going to eat it, man. Come
on,
right?
Just take your chances.
No.
So you were getting torn up by, now, if I remember correctly, you were in complete darkness, and what happened after they started attacking you?
When they attacked me, I fought them, but it was hopeless because there were a lot of them, and one of me. So they won.
Was it like people that were
they were people.
Spirits, or it wasn't like goblins or
no.
reptilians or anything like that?
No.
Okay. So what happened next?
So eventually I was unresponsive to them because I was just like all shredded down on the ground, and I heard a voice that said, pray to God. And I said to this voice, I don't know where, I think the voice came from me, but I don't know. I didn't do it. I said to it, I don't believe in God. And it said, pray to God. And I said, I don't know how to pray. I don't pray. And the voice said, pray to God. And I thought, okay, when I was a kid and went to Sunday school, we learned some prayers. Like, what were they? So I'm trying to remember. And at first, all I could remember was things that we had memorized in school.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Pledge of Allegiance and Shakespeare, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, etc. I was getting really frustrated. And then I remembered, Our Father who art in heaven. That's it. That's all I remembered. So I said it.
Yeah.
And the people around me became very, very angry. And they said in language that is far more vulgar than anything you and I could even imagine, that there is no God, nobody could hear me, and I'd better not do that because they would make things much worse for me if I kept doing it. But
so
I also noticed that as I started to make up stuff with God in it, not pretty, the stuff I was saying, but had God in it, they kept retreating away from me. as if my words were so offensive to them that it almost like physically repelled them.
Yeah.
And eventually found myself alone in that place, shouting things about God. And so I got quiet, and I spent a very long period thinking about my situation. I came to the conclusion that what had happened was that I had lived. I thought about my life, my relationship with my mother, my father, my sisters, my friends, my students, my wife, my kids. I thought about all that stuff and came to the conclusion that I'd lived a failure of a life. I didn't know what a successful life would be, but I realized that, my relationship with all those people I mentioned could have been better.
So was this considered a life review?
No.
No, it was just a contemplating.
It was a self-evaluation.
Okay.
I had a life review later.
Okay.
And I realized that I had gone down the sewer pipe of the universe where all the garbage goes. And these people had come. They were the sewer people who were taking me down deeper into the sewage.
That reminds me of that movie Chud from when I was a kid. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No, I don't know
it. It was a horrible like horror movie where people would come out of the sewer and drag you down and kill you. But,
well,
anyways.
Yeah, I don't. I mean this kind of literally, but I'm talking about in a metaphysical sense. Not.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, I lay there in complete despair, thinking this is it. This is my existence. And sooner or later, those people who had at me were going to come back, and like the only what would I do about it? Because the only thing I could do would be become one of them, because I didn't want to be a victim anymore. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be one of them, and I didn't want to be in that place. And there was no way for me to get out of that place. And then a memory of myself as a child in a Sunday school classroom singing "Jesus Loves Me" came to me. And I both saw myself and heard myself, and most importantly, felt as a child believing that there was this Superman guy named Jesus. He didn't have a red cape, but he had a white cape. And like when I was a little kid, and when the alligators were snapping at my toes at night, in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Remember the alligators?
Not really.
Bears, tigers, lions. Out of the closet.
Okay, yeah.
I would pray to Jesus, and they would go away. And.
But by the way, I as far as kids are concerned, I feel like they have some sort of intuition. Like when you say that kids experience things like that, even if it might be in their imagination, I actually feel like somehow there's some sort of intuition that kids have.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Anyways, that's beside the point.
So I called out to Jesus. I didn't know whether he was real or if he was true, but I wanted it to be real. I wanted it to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And to my incredible surprise and wonder, a light appeared in the darkness, a tiny little light, and it got very bright very rapidly. And I was actually a little bit anxious about it because I thought it might annihilate me because it was so bright. I once worked as a welder, and this was much brighter than a welding light. And I don't know if you know it.
I've welded before. You have to have the special goggles.
Did you ever get the visor down just a little bit behind when you drew the arc?
Like it has this
you flash spot. Yourself.
Yeah, you get a blind spot.
It hurts. Yeah. I mean, it literally hurts. And that night you have terrible headaches and your eyes are like. Well, this light was brighter, so it wasn't actually light. It's like light, but it's not light.
It's like a power source, or
yeah. Anyways, different physics, and it came over me, and out of it emerged hands and arms, and he reached down and touched me. And when he touched me, I became, in a few seconds, I saw it all happen. I became whole, completely whole again.
Mm-hmm.
And I, of course, felt great. But most importantly, when he touched me, I was filled with a love that goes far beyond any understanding of what we call love. It's much greater love than anything we've ever experienced or know. But I don't know a substitute word for love other than this was a great love. And he picked me up and put his arms around me and rubbed my back. And I had arms around him, holding him very tight, and I was crying into his chest out of joy.
Mm-hmm.
And then we lifted up out of that place, and we were traveling, and I was like, I mean, sound like an old hippie, but it's like, whoa, wow, this is amazing. I mean, like, we're just, he's carrying me and we're going, we're out of here, like,
yeah.
And then I wanted to get my composure to see where we were headed. And when I looked up in the direction where we were going, at first I thought it was a galaxy,
mm-hmm.
a great spinning orb of light and entities and lots of coming and going. And then I realized that it was where God lived.
Okay.
And also known as heaven.
Yeah.
And I felt horrible. And I thought to myself, he's made a terrible mistake. I'm garbage.
Huh.
And he should put me back where he got me.
So you knew that you were meant for hell, in other words. Like, you should have been meant for hell, as far as how you felt.
No, I was. Yeah. I mean, it was like, duh,
Believe it or not, this sounds a lot like Brian Melvin, because he knew that he deserved hell. So it's just interesting to contrast both your experiences.
All the people down there kind of know it. They know. I mean, they're not all that surprised. It's not like, oh no, not me, this is unjust. No, they're not doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain benefits to being in hell. There's no restraints on your behavior.
Yeah. Is there different? Okay, I don't want to necessarily get into hell, but obviously, I have a lot of questions about it because there's different perspectives from different people in near-death experiences and all that. But just to kind of continue, just to finish off what your experience had in store for you. So you basically were flying around with Jesus, and he was just showing you all the sights. Or you got to see heaven. You're heading toward heaven, like this galaxy-looking thing.
Yeah.
Wow,
so,
okay.
We stopped, and he spoke to me for the first time, and he said, "We don't make mistakes. You belong here."
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, I didn't say anything. I thought, how do you know what I just thought? And he said, I know everything you've ever thought. And then I realized, this is bad. And I started to think of the things that I didn't want him to know that I thought about.
Yeah.
Mainly in the area of women and their anatomy, which I've always been very interested in.
I bet you have.
I know this is surprising coming from a man, but
absolutely not. Yeah. I can't even fathom such a thing.
I know. Yeah. So he laughed and laughed and laughed, and I was like, "Oh wow, he thinks this is funny. This is good. I'm gonna like this guy."
Jesus has a sense of humor.
Yeah, he's got a great sense of humor. He loves to laugh. He thinks we're hysterical. And in a kind way. The same way that like a grandfather or grandmother thinks their grandkids are really funny. Even when the parents are like, "Oh no, I can't believe they just said that or did it. Like,
Yeah. It's like the innocent, like, type of acceptance.
yeah, I bought some special clay for one of my grandsons, some really nice special oven-fired clay. And I said, so what do you want to make? And he goes, poop. I said, I spent money on this clay. I don't want to make poop. I said, but the doggies will make all the poop you want if you want to play with poop.
You probably want to use that for clay, definitely.
Anyway, so but Jesus thinks he thinks of us as children. Okay, we are. And anyhow, so then he called over a group of angels and they gave me a life review, which was terrible from my perspective because it was not good.
Yeah.
And then he invited me to ask questions. And so I asked him everything that I could think of to ask him. And then he told me that I had to come back to this world. And he and I had a big argument that lasted a long time, which was kind of interesting. And then he sent me back and I was back. And when I came back, it was now 9:00 at night. And the nurse came into the room and said, a doctor has arrived at the hospital. This is Saturday night, 9:00. And you're going to have surgery. And they prepped me, and I had the surgery at 10.
Mm-hmm. So, gosh.
That's the short version.
Yeah. I'm sure that, like, you have your book that you've explained a lot more detail. As far as the life review, just real quick, as a Christian, I know that there's the great white throne judgment. And is there any difference between the judgment as far as like the life review, like how we fare as far as obviously Jesus accepted you for who you were at that moment, but as far as judgment is concerned, is that the judgment according to your perspective?
I believe it is. See, one of the things that is hard to explain to people from the perspective of near-death experience is that in this world we operate under linear time. We also operate under basically four-dimensional time-space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out there, those things are not applicable. For example, people talk about there's no time there. Well, actually, it's just the opposite. It's all time there. All time is simultaneous.
Yes.
And so it's very hard for people to get the concept that when you go into God's world, the past, the present, and the future to God are all present now.
So whenever the Bible references like eternal torment or forever or just eternity in general, our interpretation of that, we try to wrap our minds around it, and it doesn't really
we project
translate.
A succession of moments, like in space we call a line a succession of points.
Yes,
like a
linear
succession of moments.
Yeah.
But in God's time, it's not a succession of moments. God works through the whole thing as if it's all present to God right there and then. So
when he says, I know that the end from the beginning, he's basically saying it's all now. It's basically.
Yeah. There's a really good book by that title, or The Eternal Now, that God is now. And so one of the ways that we can access God is through contemplation, meditation, try and get into the now, be more present to the present.
Yeah. Okay. And the podcast that I have, Contemplating the Cosmos, I'm actually, I like to look at things as deep as I possibly can and try to analyze things in depth. And I'm not that guy that just will immediately dismiss something when it's outside of my bias, my realm of, I kind of look at everything like a philosophical perspective. And so like my glasses help me see more clearly, but like a lens of interpretation allows you to interpret the information based on your biased perspective. And that's kind of how I relate to anybody's perspective. Now, that's where I'm like, I've heard debates like creation versus evolution. I've heard debates, the existence of God versus, just everything's random. And obviously, whenever somebody tries to plead their case, they're pleading it from the perspective that it's their belief system. And so when it comes to so you had an experience, and you were actually an atheist, which obviously you might have had that lens of interpretation initially, but it's not subjective bias when you see Jesus standing there. It's literally like you can't interpret it any other way other than I'm standing before Jesus.
Yeah.
I've considered, like, okay, when I was mentioning, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, so I'm going to kind of go back to Brian Melvin again, because I kind of selected his near-death experience as being something that is different than some of the others that I've heard, because he suggests that there's evil entities that deceive us on the other side. And they're trying to masquerade as like an angel of light, but he actually said he met Jesus, and there was judgment, and he was sent to the bottomless pit. And but when he went down to the bottomless pit, he experienced these reptilian creatures like manifesting as his friends and family and stuff, and he could see these other people that were in these like cell type things. This is where it sounds like the Matrix, but they were actually being. Are you familiar with the holodeck on Star Trek? It's basically, it's like it's the room where they're. Okay, so they are literally building a narrative or a scenario where they start believing a certain way. And it's all based on deception.
Yeah.
And now, if this is even true, which it's a very creative story if he's making it up, but it kind of takes me back a little bit as far as like, what if all of these experiences that people have are experiences that are meant for them as some sort of scenario that they're. So on one hand, you could have these entities that are telling you how to believe, or you're actually having an experience. So what if there's having an experience with Jesus or like, okay, how do I explain this without sounding crazy? Okay, so I think that you can be intercepted by Jesus, but you could also be intercepted by an evil entity.
Right, I agree.
So, but they could also masquerade as like an angel of light, like Satan. So if somebody is not able to discern what that actually looks like, I don't know if. So as far as the vetting process for me, trying to understand near-death experiences, I want to understand what would be considered authoritative, because there's a lot of different perspectives.
We have okay, I want to answer, but I want to respond to the setup that you gave me. I don't know Brian, what's his name?
Brian Melvin.
I don't know him or his experience, so I really can't comment on his, and I don't want to. But I've read lots of near-death experiences, and I've talked to lots of people who've had near-death experiences, both good and bad. First of all, number one, if anyone's had a real near-death experience, here's a test. You can tell the liars from the truth tellers, because they'll tell you it's ineffable. They may not use that word, but they say you really can't describe it. You really can't, it's beyond words.
Mm-hmm.
Ineffable.
Yes.
And so why do you talk about them our language is inadequate because we often feel a compulsion to want to talk about them, even though it's with great difficulty, and the vocabulary that we've been equipped with is inadequate to describe things that are beyond this world. Okay. The other thing is that there are reality checks. Okay. There is in the history of the world a body of I used a couple different terms: sacred literature, mystical literature, philosophical, theological literature, of which I've studied a lot of it, not just the Western Christian tradition. I've also done some studies in other traditions. And some of the literature is difficult to understand because it doesn't follow like my Western idea of sort of rational flow. It's like the great turtle came and ate the, cockroach who spewed out the corn.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean?
You're getting into the exact thing that I'm starting to look into now with ancient writings and like mythologies, because a lot of these mythologies have like these really deep, complex, type and shadow meanings.
Right. Like, for example, I've done a lot of work in Central America, and I really like the ancient Mayan religion as I understand it. But their language is all about animals and plants and, things like that. But if you think of it as symbolic, which is the way I want to interpret it, it all starts to make a lot of sense, and is in fact amazingly, in many ways, converges with Christian understanding.
Yes, yes. I call it parabolic because Jesus always speaks in parables.
Yeah. So, the tradition that I know the most about is the Western tradition. And if a person studied real theology and not dime store self-help theology or radio or TV theology, which is a lot of, silly stuff, but I mean real theologians, it's extremely rational. And ultimately, it makes an enormous amount of sense. And so what I came to the conclusion early on, and this has only been substantiated with 34 years of more study, is that Christian theology does a great job of explaining who God is, who we are, and what the relationship is and should be.
So, are you kind of suggesting that a Christian perspective is just another lens to look through as far as trying to interpret what God or who God is?
I want to quote Mother Teresa when she was asked what she thought of all the religions in India, which is, she was in India and there's only 3% Christian there, mostly Hindu, plus Muslim and Sikh and some other things. Mother Teresa said, quote, "I love all religions. I love my own the best." So I think that there's some value and some worth and some good in the study of all different kinds of faiths and religions. But I think that Christianity is the one that's got the greatest insight, greatest truth.
Yeah, I've began to take the position that there is none worthy, not one, and so to say that you're under the umbrella of the correct religion doesn't necessarily do anybody any good, in my opinion, because that umbrella doesn't really help anybody unless they have a relationship with God, number one.
Well, as Jesus defined what great religion is,
pure and undefiled. Yeah.
He said, "Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself."
Yeah.
So that's my measuring stick of other religions.
Yes.
So when another religion says, put on an explosive vest and find a crowded bus and blow yourself up. I go,
Doesn't sound consistent with the love approach, right, for sure. Yeah, and I kind of look at truth like it's one big pie. So if you take like the big pie, which is 100% of truth, right? You could say that we have one sliver of
tiny sliver
of truth, yeah. And I think that all approaches could have some sort of truth there. Now, as far as something that is considered false or deception or whatever, I often refer back to what Jesus was saying about, a little bit of leaven can corrupt a loaf, and I think that deception can, take you away from truth.
Yeah.
And so I'm on this kick lately where I'm trying to understand reality as being there's truth and there's deception. It's one or the other, and I'm trying to filter through that to see what is what, and obviously the lens of interpretation plays a role in that, and I'm trying to figure out what lens that needs to be. Now, I believe Christianity is the best possible lens you can have as far as interpreting our realm of reality, and I still believe that a lot of Christianity is limited because when Jesus was talking about the churches of Revelation, right? There was these different churches, and each of them were kind of falling in a different category as far as their effort level or whatever. And but he was condemning them in the sense that, wait, I'm judging you by your deeds, and obviously you're falling short. And he's talking to the churches. So I'm thinking, okay, these are just churches in Turkey or something, or Greece or wherever. And but I'm thinking that as far as a church is an organized group of people, my dad would actually use the word ecclesia, because he's a Hebrew roots guy. My dad and my brother both. I haven't really ventured down that road yet because I guess you could say because of Galatians. I feel like it doesn't necessarily make us more qualified to go back and become a Judaizer or whatever. But but I kind of look at it more simplistic, like you were saying about the love, is that love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself is the greatest commandments, and everything else will fall into place. So as far as how we're so I always think back to, like, is there anything that's going to help our cause as far as because there's heaven, there's hell, right?
Yeah.
So you got to experience both to some degree. Now, I don't know if there's different levels of hell. Brian Melvin would say
there are.
Yeah, because I understand outer darkness as being some sort of like place that you went. That's right. my view of it. But then there's also the basement of hell that you might consider like where fire is or whatever. I don't know. So I kind of want to open that up a little bit.
Well,
because
according to Dante's Inferno, the lowest level of hell is ice.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I might have to get into that. You're the second person I've talked to that actually brought up Dante's
I don't know if
Inferno.
Dante's authoritative or not. I'm just saying that's what he believed.
Yeah. So, so let me ask you this. This is another question that I had. So going back into historical mythology, you might say, and I say historical because I consider mythology historical, because I will always shout out my brother in his book called From Noah to Hercules, because he kind of approached the angle of understanding history through mythology, and that mythology was actually never intended to be something that was considered like a fake story. It was actually
right.
It was just
truth.
It was an embellished story or something that was elevated to become more. I don't know if I should use the word theatrical or anything, but basically it was an embellished story. So these Greek gods or Roman gods or whoever were these people that were put in a. So this is where I started questioning, okay, how far back do near-death experiences go? I know that Plato or somebody was talking about. In fact, I heard Raymond Moody talking on this.
Yeah, it's in the Book of Timaeus by Plato in the Republic.
Yeah, so clearly these experiences go back. Now, the question is, the experiences that people were having. And again, this is where I start wondering, okay, people's thought process on heaven and hell, did that come from near-death experiences? I mean, or because obviously after you die, you can't really tell people like, oh yeah, I went to heaven or hell. But people that have a brush with death, they could come back and say, oh, I had an experience.
All had a near-death experience.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few. Like Stephen was starting to see the other side, and I don't know. Do you kind of look at this realm like it's a different channel? So like if you click the channel over one, you're going to be in another realm kind of thing that kind of coexists in a different layer than our layer, or how do you look at that?
Yeah, it's very unsettling because after my near-death experience, it was very hard to adjust to this world because people are acting like a bunch of naughty children, and they don't get. We're here to love one another, and a lot of people don't get that at all. And I used to tell people, I don't say it anymore because my wife doesn't like me to say it, but I feel like a stranger in a strange land. But on the other hand,
wait, is that from Petra? Did you listen to that song? We're strangers in a strange land. Yeah,
there's an old science fiction book about a Martian comes to Earth and he's a stranger in a strange land. But anyways, not Heineken. That's a beer. It was Heinlein. Anyways, it's hard to adjust to this world when you realize that this is not. We're not operating on all cylinders here, and I'm hoping for a great awakening in this world, and it's what Jesus told me they're waiting for. By they, I mean God, heaven. They're waiting for the big awakening of this world.
So do you consider the last days, quote unquote, or the end of the age as being the great awakening, or do you look at it like Jesus will return to coexist with us, or we're going to be taken up into the clouds? Is it all metaphor to you as far as that's concerned?
No, the Spirit of Christ will be in every person.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and I've heard this interpretation too, and it's extremely compelling to me, because I often look at like the book of Revelation when it talks about we'll each be given a white stone, and we're going to join Christ and the cornerstone of this building. We're all going to build this building with each of the stones, right? And it's going to become the New Jerusalem, which is all parabolic to me. We are the white stones that are part of this New Jerusalem, and this great awakening, which it's so obvious that people are starting to wake up from their slumber.
I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to see it a lot more. Or you might say I'm starting to see the division between the sheep and the goats.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that are getting deeper into their slumber, and then there's other people that are starting to wake up more. Yeah. And there is that division.
Yeah.
So I'd like to think that my contribution to all of this is to help people wake up, because I think of
go for it, brother.
Yeah, I'm trying to, like I'll reference back to Ezekiel when he's saying, when God's saying, if you see the sword coming down on the land and if you don't tell people to, or warn people of the impending judgment, that their blood is on your head. And obviously, I kind of see. I always think about how that could be a metaphor. Everything is a metaphor in a lot of ways, and I'm trying to contrast. I know that there's types and shadows, so there's an aspect that is reality, and then there's an aspect of something spiritual behind it.
Right.
And I'm starting to see the spiritual part of it just come to life in me, and trying to understand all of this reality. And I feel like maybe, like there's a lot more people saying, that like Muslims are saying that they saw Jesus in a vision and said that, Jesus is God incarnate. And I don't know, basically. So can we expand a little bit on this concept of Christ in us? What do you mean by that when you say that?
I want to recommend 2 books. One is Imagine Heaven by John Burke, which is about near-death experiences, and it touches on this topic a lot. The other one is a book that I think is full of truth and goodness, and it's The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan priest who lives in New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And there was the Jesus event, which was approximately 30 years, 2,000 years ago, where fully human, fully divine incarnation. But there's also the Christ event, which is one with God. In theology, we call him the creative activity of God, the divine economia. And that's always been simultaneous with God, and that's what we're looking forward to, is when the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Christ, also known as the Holy Spirit, not only lives but reigns in every heart and every mind in the world. And that's what we're looking forward to. The book of Revelation was written to a specific audience at a specific time. And that time was a terrible time for Christians, and they all understood the symbols used in that book. Like, for example, 666 is the numerological equivalent of Neron, which is Latin for Nero. And I mean, they knew when they were talking about the great Satan being 666, it was Nero. I mean, they all knew that.
By the way, I don't really look at the Antichrist as being a person. I think, I mean, it could be, but I'm saying that anybody that operates from the spirit of Antichrist is Antichrist.
Right.
So, and I think that there's
been lots of Antichrists, lots of them, not just none. Yeah.
So, when Revelation talks about the beast, I actually feel like in Daniel, when it talks about the beasts, these are government systems that rise up, and I think the 7-headed beast with 10 horns is the New World Order. It's going to be the final government system that's in place before Jesus, or the Christ conscious. I don't know if you can look at a Christ consciousness awakens, or if you consider Jesus actually returning, and that he's that stone that destroys the statue of.
Well, I think Christ consciousness is a good term.
Okay, because I've looked at it from both angles, and to be honest with you, I'm not so opposed to there being a great awakening in people, or Christ consciousness, so to speak, before the physical return of Jesus. But again, I really it's to be seen, because but with all the parabolic or metaphoric type things that I'm seeing in the Bible, I'm starting to realize that, or just the nature of mythology, it seems to me like that, the message that is, so like when Jesus was speaking in parables, he's trying to say it in a way where people can understand where he's coming from.
Right.
But he also says, how are you going to understand heavenly things when you can't even understand earthly things or
Right,
something
right.
like that. So I think that there's a little bit lost in translation as far as trying to, understand the mind of God, because we don't. I think that people have obviously limitations on how we can, I think that the Bible is an amazing attempt to understand God. Now, I believe that some people, you could tell that Paul has different writing style than, like Isaiah or something.
Right.
You know that there's different authors there, but I believe that a lot of them kind of play together and kind of tie together as far as their understanding of God. Now, all of it it seems kind of convoluted when I really start trying to analyze this. And I like to think that, so this is one of the reasons why I've kind of moved away from the church, in the sense that I don't feel like it's really helped me understand the nature of God as well as I would have liked up to this point. I feel like as soon as I started digging and trying to understand things for myself is when I started to understand things a little better. And that's why I'm reaching out to you, because I want to hear your perspective.
Okay,
And
I want to jump on you now.
Sure.
No more Mr. Nice Guy.
All right, go for
The
it.
church isn't just there for you to grow in knowledge. Of course, it should do that. It should do that. The church is there so that you can worship God. The church is there so that you can love and support other people in their spiritual journey. So don't, I think that's one of the problems with our culture. People go to church to see what they can get out of it. And it's like, no, you go to church to what you can give to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've retired as a pastor, and so what I'm doing now, which I love, is I'm in the choir, and we sing God's praise, and we, and not just the music that the choir does, but we, we have the congregational hymns and responses and things like that, and we, the choir, feel like we're leading and inspiring the congregation to sing with real heartfelt meaning those things.
Mm-hmm.
We think of ourselves, and I think it's fair to think of ourselves as worship leaders.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is I'm not up there doing the pastor thing. I'm up there with we have about 22 people in our choir. I'm up there with 22 lay people, all with the same intention, trying to do this in harmony. Like the whole point of being in a choir is to harmonize with the other voices. So, I mean, I'm not just harmonizing with the basses. I'm also trying to harmonize with the sopranos and the altos and the tenors, right? And that's part of the training here. That's what we're here to learn, is to live in harmony with one another. And that's one of the things that I'm getting out of being part of church.
Yeah.
We also have a really good Bible study before the worship. And people talk about, tough theological questions. And so anyways, you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you as far as when I'm not trying to come down on the church in general, but I definitely, because I still go to church. I was just at church right before. I haven't separated from it. In fact,
good. I didn't.
Yeah, like it says, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves, but exhort one another all the more that you see the day approaching. Yeah. And I actually feel like the exhortation is that what you're describing is building each other up and lifting each other up. And yeah, I do admit that my hunger for knowledge and understanding is it could actually be a little bit of an obsession, which could interfere with God in a lot of ways, because that's kind of where that Gnostic thing kind of went away from God, or went away from Jesus, because they're always pursuing knowledge, gnosis, and it kind of makes me think of the balance that everything in moderation kind of thing. It's like there has to be a balance as far as Now I think the best examples are like the disciples. I think that, these guys were literally like giving everything up for the sake of spreading the gospel. And okay, so I feel like there's a theme in near-death experiences about love, and I believe that.
Oh yeah, it's the theme. I mean, that's the one. I mean, every legitimate near-death experiencer, which is mostly all of them that I've spoken to, that's it. It's all about love.
Yeah. So I know that like John, 1 John specifically, he says that really love is what defines who we are in Christ. And if we're not operating from love, then we're actually not in him, is what it says.
Right.
And so and that people have that sense of love. Now I don't know if you really touched on it very much when you were explaining your NDE, but this feeling of love that you had in the presence of Jesus was far surpasses our understanding of love in this reality. And in your words, probably couldn't even touch on how you felt about that, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, so the reason I'm reaching out to you is I have this desire to kind of interpret what near-death experiences are, and in some ways I kind of look back at the historical aspects of mythology and think there's metaphors that are being presented in a story. And in some ways, like when I hear these different experiences that people have, I almost wonder if somehow we're being given, and I say we, I'm talking about like you and others that have had near-death experiences, are given some sort of, I guess, metaphor to explain how we can understand or how we can interpret what you went through. And I say metaphor as in like some sort of parable. There's only you can only translate into English so much.
Yeah.
So I think that you're given what you needed to see.
Well, I think what's happening is we are at a critical crossroads in human evolutionary history, and I'm talking about spiritual evolution, not physical. Mm-hmm. And in this crossroads, God in his infinite wisdom, knowing about the cynicism of our time, said, okay, I'm going to give millions of people an experience of life after death. And there, surveys say that in America, there's more than 20 million Americans that have had near-death experiences. So there's a lot of, this kind of two poles to this. There's people that like, I don't believe any of this stuff. I've never had any experience and I don't think any of it's true. Or there's people that said, I've had an experience and this stuff is true and it is real. The way I put it like this, I spent a couple of days in Juva, Finland, which is a very small town where my mother had a girlfriend from in the United States. She was from Juva. So we went to Juva and spent a few days with my mother's elementary school girlfriend when my mother was in her 80s. They hadn't seen each other.
Wow.
I could talk to you in detail about Juva, 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 Finland. Now, I'm either lying or there's also a possibility I'm telling the truth. I happen to be telling the truth. It really is a Juva, Finland, and I was really there, and my mother really had a friend there. What do I have to support that? Absolutely no proof whatsoever. I don't have a piece of paper, or, other than my sister, everybody else is dead. My sister was there. She could say, yeah, we were there. It was kind of boring. Do you believe people that have had these experiences, or do you believe people that say, I don't believe it? I mean, it's like if you're interested in knowledge, if you're interested in truth, I tend to go with the people that come up with these remarkably consistent stories. And there is a commonality. They're not, no near-death experience is the same. They all have an element of being idiosyncratic, but they also have really strong commonalities, which is what Raymond Moody found out in his study that introduced the topic in 1975.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just got to bring up like the Noor Foundation. They had a panel with Mary Nill. I think Sam Parnia. Are you familiar with that name, Sam Parnia? Or Parnia, or something like that. I just got to say right now that guy is interesting to me because he's a resuscitation doctor. Like he has resuscitated hundreds and hundreds of people.
Oh.
And he has a research that he's doing through the University of New York, and basically he's basically, I'm trying to remember what it's called, this research that he was doing, but like I remember like he was kind of showing like certain things that they do when they're in the room where they're resuscitating people. They have like little signs that are like above the eye level. So like your eye level is right here, but you actually put the sign up and you can only see it from the top of the ceiling.
Yeah.
And he's seeing if people that are above their bodies can actually see the signs that are above eye level.
How's he doing?
I'm trying to get this guy to sit down and have a talk with me, but he's one of those guys that's too popular to talk to me at this point.
Yeah. But I've met people that have, like, when they had the near-death experience, went down the hall during their near-death experience and tried to talk to like their husband who was praying, and after near-death experience, told her, this woman, Carol Robbins, told her husband word for word what he prayed.
Yeah.
And then after the experience, she said, by the way, on the roof of the hospital, there's an old sneaker up in the northeast.
Oh, yeah. I heard about this one. Yep.
Yeah. And so he went up to the roof of the hospital, and there was the old sneaker.
Yeah. Who was talking about this? There's a guy that I literally just listened to that was talking about this story. I'm trying to remember his name. Anyways, it's an older gentleman that, well, anyways, that's beside the point. But yeah, Brian Melvin had a similar kind of thing where he saw his dog like licking his hand from above, and the dog was like yelping, like the dog knew that he was dying or something. And then he went up to the ceiling, and he could actually see a thumbprint or something on the paint or the texture of the wall. And it was kind of in an angle where you couldn't really see it from the ground level, but he could see it if he actually went up to it, like on a ladder or something. So he said he went through the ceiling, and he could see like a bandana that was like on the water cooler, or I guess in Arizona they have water coolers. But he saw this like bandana, which literally you can't see that unless you're up there. And he said he had never been up there, and so
yeah, I know all these things are interesting, but they don't really change people. The big truth that God is real, that there is life after death, that Jesus is real. Those are the things that I had hoped and thought would change people's lives, change their appreciation of what life is about. And it has happened sometimes, but people that don't want to believe, the stuff you're talking about, they're going to dismiss it all. They'll come up with some, explanation. I mean, you can argue against anything. I mean, I can argue against my reality of sitting in this chair talking to you now, and I can argue it until, for the next 3 days doesn't make it right, but I can argue against it that this is actually happening. You know what I mean? So people that don't want to believe, I don't know what it's going to take to convince them. After my near-death experience, I wanted to tell everybody, my big thing was Jesus loves you. Talk to Jesus, and the reaction was universally like, you're nuts.
Yeah, most of these people are operating from a random, like evolution type perspective. And how do you extract this concept of love from so many different near-death experiences as like a theme? It's like, why it seems like that's a very transcendent kind of it doesn't seem like it would be relevant to death. It really doesn't.
I've told people this. The experience that I had, which totally changed my life, it ultimately led me to giving up a very nice position as a university professor and going to seminary and becoming a poorly paid pastor of small churches and stuff like that. It wasn't mine. It wasn't my fantasy. I've told people, I know what my fantasy should have been. My fantasy should have been a harem of gorgeous women. That would, that's what I liked. That's what I lived. I never had that experience in this world, and I guess I never will. But
maybe that's the experience. So maybe that's what the Muslims are. They're 1,000 virgins or whatever.
The 70 virgins and all that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I did not have my fantasy, and I don't care what anyone says. I know what my fantasies were. It would have involved some, good foods and, drink and some drugs and women and, wasn't my fantasy.
Yeah.
I never got my fantasy. I resent it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad that you didn't have that fantasy for whatever that's worth. But there's this guy.
A lot.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. But no, but so there's this guy, Michael Shermer. He's the lead editor of the Skeptic magazine.
I've met him. I was on Phil Donahue with him.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
It's funny that he was being interviewed on Joe Rogan Experience, which is like a really popular podcast now. They were touching on near-death experiences, and I'm gonna actually feature a little clip out of that interview on my documentary. But his main thing is he's saying that they can prove scientifically that near-death experiences take place in the brain. Now, I'm going to say that he's probably right to some degree, and that's where I say that, okay, there is some sort of chemical eject button.
Wait a minute. No, he's not right. If it's true, then you could replicate near-death experiences.
He says that when they were going into someone's brain.
No, they don't. It's just such nonsense. You know what he's talking about? Flashes of light.
Yeah. Yeah.
He says that's okay. See, let me tell you something about the integrity of this man. When I was on the Phil Donahue show, TV is about entertainment, right? It's not like, an intellectual, forum. Yeah. And so I didn't know when I was invited to go on there that he was going to be on there. They flew me to New York, put me up in a nice hotel. And then I never met him. And then just before, all of a sudden he's there and I'm there. He spent the whole show, 1 hour show, ridiculing me and trying
to dismiss your story, basically.
Yeah. In the most insulting way.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of sort of patience on my part to keep my cool and not react in an angry way, because he said some really very unkind things to me. So when the show was over and we're being dismissed, go home, fly home, bye-bye. He comes up to me and he said, "Hey, I hope you didn't take any of that personally." And I said, "Well, actually I did." I said, you really, really hurt me. And he said, "Oh, I didn't mean any of that." He said, "I believe you. I know you were telling the truth." He said, "I just do this to get on the TV."
Oh, really?
That's a quote. You can quote me on that. That's what he said to me.
Oh man, the fact that he even says that it's all in the brain, but then he says that when they're doing neurological like poking in the brain and stuff, he says that you could be out of your body and above your body, and I'm thinking, how does that make any sense as being like how do you perceive being above your body?
See, he misses the whole point. Near-death experience are transformative experiences.
Yeah.
I wish they would call them transformative experiences and not near-death experiences, because near-death experience isn't really describing what it's about at all. It's a completely inadequate term. Transformative experience is what it's all about. And there is no chemical, surgical, electrical means by which people have transformative experiences. It doesn't exist. He is not scientific. He's full of guano.
Yeah, I can't argue against that. I mean, I've heard Michael Shermer in debates. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Kent Hovind, but he was in a debate with Kent Hovind, and quite frankly, I think Kent Hovind put him in his place when it came to the existence of God, and I don't know. Sometimes they're just so close-minded, and you say that he's saying that he just does it for show.
That's what he told. No, I'm not saying it. I'm quoting him. I didn't say that. I'm quoting him. He said he does it for the.
And it's a very popular perspective nowadays. Some people are just so jaded by religion or spirituality or whatever, and he's just capitalizing on those type of people and how they're,
Well, but a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, once said a long time ago that everybody has a God. The question is, who is your God? So when I talk to atheists, one of the things that I like to tell them is I congratulate them on having a most excellent God, which is themselves.
Yeah.
And they get very angry with me because I try and do it in a very loving and kind way, and telling them, like, your God's, because I used to be an atheist, so like I totally get it. See, when you're your own God, you get to decide what your morality is, what to believe in, what's true, what's not true. You get to define everything. And the best part of it, here's the best part, you get to change your mind depending on the situation. Like, you go to a bar, it's Saturday night, you have, a lot of drinks, and you see a pretty woman, and you're married and you got kids, and you go, it's okay for me to hit on this lady because I'm God.
Yeah, because morality is subjective.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I really appreciate you taking your time to meet with me and talk about this stuff. And quite frankly, my wife gives me certain leeways to do this kind of stuff, and I've been kind of waiting for the text, and she just said, "Hi, Daddy." Anyways, so
the hook, you got the hook on you?
Yeah, I don't know if you recall our first conversation, I don't know, like a year ago. We talked on the phone briefly, but I was kind of starting to dabble in the near-death experiences a little bit more, and trying to understand like what was happening, the phenomena. And after my son was born, I came to realize that I just didn't have any time to do any of these interviews. And he's now 15 months, and it's gotten to the point where I can kind of squeeze these in here and there, but it's easier to do it after he goes to bed. But anyways, so by the way, my son is a miracle baby. I'm 38, the same age that you were when you had your experience. So that stuck out to me when you were saying that. And
it's a good age.
It is. I feel like I'm in the prime of my.
You are in the prime. I'm 73 and I'm falling apart.
It's a bad sign that I'm starting to see any signs of aging myself, but I my back hurts a lot, but that's beside the point. I'm still young. I better get used to it because my son is just barely getting going as far as like demanding my my physical abilities. So, but as far as closing remarks, is there anything you specifically are trying to accomplish in your ministry or whatever it is that God is putting in front of you to accomplish for the remainder of your life at this point? Is there anything that sticks out to you that you want to convey to my listening audience?
I would say that we're here to learn how to love one another, how to love God. That's what it's all about, love ourselves. And it's really hard. I thought that would be so. When Jesus told me to do that, he told me that's what I had to come back and do.
Yeah.
I thought it would be so simple. I thought you could just go around loving people. Well, it doesn't work out so great all the time, you know. And the point is to pursue it and keep pursuing it. And whether you get discouraged or whether you have successes, you just keep at it. It's a day by day thing. It's not like, you know, something you do once a year or once a month. It's like every day you just do the best you can. Like, you know, you seem to be well aware that your job, your big job in this world right now is your son and your wife. And like, you are quite right that to love them to the best of your ability, and everything else is secondary to that.
Yeah.
So it's not like we don't all have to drop everything and go be missionaries in Zimbabwe, you know. I mean, if you're called to do that, great, you know.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of mission trips and overseas, but my main job, your job, everybody's job is love the people that you're with. That's what Jesus told me. Love the people you're with.
Yep. No, that's an important message, and I feel like I am convicted by that. I'll be honest. I mean, I've kind of put this kind of stuff high on my list of priorities as far as unraveling the mysteries and really ministering to people in general. But sometimes I do put my wife to the side to do stuff like that. But we've kind of developed a system, thankfully.
I'm on your wife's side.
Yeah, I'll let her listen to this. Like, I'll say, hey, we talked about you in
What's her
my
name?
podcast. Kelsey.
Kelsey, you're right.
I'm not going to let her listen to this. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, I agree. I feel like she is the love of my life, and we've been married for 12 years, been together for 13, and you know, I actually, you know, when my son was born, there was new challenges that I didn't know how to. I mean, I felt like I was literally just like a newbie, even at 37. So, but as I start seeing how much love, like I kind of know what love you're talking about when you say that you felt this love that was overflowing from Jesus. I feel this like sense of love that's coming from me that I don't even understand when I see my son. And it's amazing to me because I see his little body growing up and just this, I don't know. I get so excited at the thought of like having more kids now. We just want to have like 10 kids now.
Whoa.
But I don't know. It's a little crazy. Oh, she's looking in here. Hi.
Can I see her?
Oh yeah. Come here real quick. Oh my gosh. He wants to meet you because I was just talking about you. Come here, little bud. This is my my son Theo.
Hi. Hi, Kelsey.
That's Howard. Here, you can listen to him.
Hello.
Hi, Kelsey. I think your emphasis on wanting your husband's full attention is 100% correct.
Thank you.
He
said you were right.
No question about that. Your son deserves every ounce of energy and time that he can give.
Yes.
Yeah.
Charlie does a good job. He's a very present dad, so that's a good thing.
Aww. Well,
all right. Well, I'll give him back to you.
Okay. Well, we're just wrapping up here. Will you grab him real quick? Hold on a second.
Theo wants to talk.
You want to talk? All right. Well, thanks, Howard. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Interesting. You named him Theo.
Yeah, Theos. I actually, that's not his official name as Theos, but
Oh.
I'm 2 more minutes. So her dad's name is Theodore, and he was Theodore the Fifth or something like that.
Wow.
And he had two girls that weren't passing down his name anymore. So he almost named his Kelsey Theodora, but he thought that wasn't feminine enough or something. But but in honor of him, because he's been a great part of influence in our life, we named our son Theo, and I agreed to Theo because I like Theos. It actually means God or one or a gift from God, I think is what his name means officially. But anyways, yeah, I'm glad you were able to meet my family, and they play an important part of my life. That one of the reasons I want to do stuff like this is, I was afraid to have my son come into the world at one point because I felt like there was just too much evil in the world, and I didn't want him to have.
Didn't we talk about that a year or so ago? I
think so, maybe. Yeah. We might have touched on that, but now I've gotten to the point where I feel like a lot of that it's like for refinement. I feel like we're kind of in a sort of refiner's fire just being here. And you went through a certain refinement when you had your experience, and that's the theme that I see with near-death experiences more often than not is they'll come back, their life changes. And
the Bible says God's love is like a refiner's fire. Whoa. Like I get that.
Yeah. So we didn't touch too much into the hell aspects. Maybe we can kind of briefly just touch on it for a second. I've heard people say that hell is not really a place, but it's more of an experience that you have, so that it's like God scares the hell out of you when you have that experience. And so literally the reason for hell is really just for the experience and not necessarily like this whole aspect of eternal hellfire isn't necessarily hell, eternal hell, but it's like what you're saying with time, just everything exists all in one kind of thing. I don't really know what to think of it at this point. My interpretation from the Bible now is Sheol, and Sheol means the grave. Gehenna means the dump that is being burned, and Hades is really the Greek god the god of the underworld. And I don't really have the same position that I used to on hell as I used to. Anyways, I think it's almost time for me to wrap up here, but okay. But I really appreciate you taking your time, and I will try to keep in touch with you. Maybe we can revisit some of this down the road. I don't know if you ever travel to share your experience.
Oh yeah, I do.
Do you ever come to Boise, Idaho?
All over the United States. I'll be in Utah in September.
Are you serious? That's like right up the street. We're in Idaho, so.
I've never been to Idaho.
Oh, really?
My wife has, but not me. I'll tell you. I'm speaking at the International Association of Near-Death Studies on September 5th and 6th in Salt Lake City.
Oh my gosh, that's the IONS conference. Yeah. I would love to go to that. I just.
Mary Neal's going to be there. I'll introduce you.
Oh, really? When was this again?
September 5th and 6th.
Okay, so that gives me a little bit of time to figure things out. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. What's the guy's name that's on NDE radio? I'm trying to remember it. Anyways.
I know who you mean, but I can't think of it.
Yeah. Anyways, but I started listening to that, and then that's actually the first time I heard Eric Jurdy, and then I heard him on on Heart of the Matter, which is the show out of Utah. And that's kind of how I got connected with you, is through Eric, because I guess Marsha is on
Facebook.
Yeah, that's how I got connected with her. And yeah, so anyways, but it's a small world in the near-death experience. It seems like I'm able to get connected with a lot of people, which is amazing. So, but I'm humbled and very grateful that I was able to talk to you today. And I would love to, meet you in person over in
Well,
Salt
let me
Lake.
know if you intend to come to Salt Lake.
I'm going to see if I can make a point to do that. I think it'd be a nice little road trip. It's only a 5-hour drive for us.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah. So, and we could just spend the weekend there or whatever, and just have a nice little mini vacation. Wouldn't be too bad.
Well, let me know ahead of time so we can meet up, because there's going to be a lot of demands on my time there. All right.
Okay.
I mean, I know how it goes. I've done this kind of thing before, so I mean, I'll set aside a block of time for you, and
yeah, I'll probably bring my wife and son out with me.
Even
Cool.
better.
Heck yeah, man. All right, well, at this point, we'll just go ahead and wrap it up, and I just want to say thank you again, and you're a very blessed man. You've influenced me in a great way, and I appreciate what you've done up to this point. And yeah, so have an awesome rest of your Sunday, and
Okay.
we'll talk again here down the road.
Yeah, think about how you can build up that church of yours.
Oh,
Like
I will.
the church you want it to be.
You say that you're involved in worship or choir. I'm one of the worship leaders at my church. I actually
What do you do?
I play guitar and sing, play bass.
Oh, cool. Hey,
Yeah.
go for it, man. That's a great ministry.
Yeah, I kind of stepped back a little bit since my son's been born, but I was very involved for many years, being one of the worship leaders. So, but yeah, heck yeah, man.
Music. I asked Jesus what was the most important skill one could acquire in this world. And he said music. And I said, music? I have no musical ability at all. Like, you can't mean it. And he said, yeah. He said, you need to work on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to hear your choir sometime.
Oh, no. It's nothing, just regular. But I think we do a pretty good job.
That's awesome, man. All right. Well, maybe I'll swing out to Kentucky too sometime, because I need to go see the Noah's Ark out that way. I know that they have I don't know how far you are from that, but
an hour.
Oh, that's not too far.
No.
All right, man. Well, I better wrap this up, and you have an awesome rest of your week or whatever. We'll talk to you soon.
Blessings and peace.
All right. Thanks, Howard.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.